10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 262. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 262 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us again, and we've got our Lick of the Month episode this week. This week we're going to be looking at a great Sonny Stitt excerpt from his solo on All of Me that kind of embodies a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about this month so far, a little bit of that rhythmic variety and rhythmic flexibility in this excerpt that we're going to look at. But before we jump into the show, just wanted to let you know that you can support this podcast and get a PDF for every single episode that we have ever done, all 262 episodes, by supporting us on Patreon. This is a listener-supported show. We do not have any advertising on this show, and the way that we stay in business is due to the generosity of our listeners. So if you want to join up, get the details of that subscription for a very, very low monthly fee. You can get all those fantastic rewards by going to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, and getting yourself signed up today for either $3 or $5 a month. Want to give a big shout out to some new patrons this week. Thank you to our new $5 patron, Patrick, and thank you to our two new $3 patrons, Stefan and Marcus. Thank you guys so much for choosing to support the show, and of course to the other over 300 people over there that are supporting us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So again, if you want to get signed up, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, and get signed up for instant access to all those materials. All right, so as I mentioned, we're going to be taking a look at an excerpt from a solo that Sonny Stitt played on All of Me. And actually, all of you Patreon members, you will recognize this. I threw the entire transcription up last week as kind of a little bonus thing. So you're going to have already seen this if you have checked out Patreon this past week. So we're going to be looking at his last 8 measures on this particular solo in All of Me. And one thing I want to mention before we jump into this, they actually play this in a different key than it is normally played. Normally this tune is played in concert C, but they actually play it on this record with brother Jack McDuff. They actually play it in the key of B flat. So if you're familiar with the tune All of Me and you look at this transcription and go, wait, these aren't the changes that I remember, you'd be right about that. They actually play it a step down. So just a note if you're confused by that. So we're going to be looking at the last 8 bars, and those last 8 bars are where it goes to the 4 chord, then the minor 4 chord, back to 1, 6, 2, 5, 1, and then a little turnaround in the last bar that goes back to the top. But what we're really concerned about is the rhythm that's being played. And I think that Sonny Stitt really displays a lot of what we are talking about in the past 2 episodes, where you're dealing with all these different lengths of notes and sort of seamlessly transitioning from one length of note into another. And the particular notes on display here are how he uses eighth notes and triplets side by side to really create a great effect in this particular part of his solo. So before we actually talk about it, I'm just going to play the last 8 bars for you so you can hear the actual excerpt, and then we'll chat about it a little bit. All right, so what a fantastic example of that rhythmic flexibility. So let's look at how this little excerpt is structured and talk about how that flexibility comes into play. So we notice that in the first 2 measures, he's using a lot of space. There's a lot of rest in the first 2 measures, and he's using quarter notes to a great effect in those first 2 measures, following those changes really closely, the major to the minor. Then he moves into a little bit more of an eighth note line starting in measure 3 of the excerpt. We see some running eighth notes. And then in measure 5 and 6, we see those eighth notes kind of continue. And he does a great job of throwing in measure 6 on the and of 1, we see 2 16th notes. And this is going to be a really common thing that we're going to see in the playing of Sonny Stitt. Bebop in general. He uses some 16th notes as kind of passing tones to get to beat 2. And we see that a lot. Or we see like 16th note triplets a lot of times off of the beats. And that's perfect because it fills up exactly a half of a beat and makes the harmonic language of bebop kind of work. If you look at the playing of Charlie Parker or Sonny Stitt or any of the bebop masters, you see that all the time, 16th notes or 16th note triplets on the and. So that's what we're seeing in measure 6. Now, when we get to measure 7, this is my favorite thing that he does. All of a sudden, he transitions into eighth note triplets, and he plays this really, really cool little ditty with the eighth note triplets at the end of the phrase here. And it's just kind of the perfect ending to a solo. And it also really displays that flexibility of I can freely move out of this triplet feel and this eighth note feel. I can play quarter notes, I could play eighth notes, I could play 16th notes, I could play triplets all right next to each other. And it gives his solo just this incredible flow and incredible feel that really wouldn't be possible if we didn't work on the kind of stuff that we've been working on for the past 2 weeks. So we hear that in measure 7, and it kind of spills into measure 8. And then he comes out of the triplets at the end of measure 8 and into measure 9 to kind of put a period on the solo. So now that we've investigated this in kind of 2-bar segments, now let's look at it as a whole. Do you notice that the note values are getting shorter as he moves through this 8-bar phrase? We start out with some quarter notes and some space, and then he moves into a little bit more of a typical eighth note based bebop line for the next 4 measures with that little 16th note interjection in measure 6. And then he shortens the rhythmic value again by playing triplets. So can you see that these notes are getting a little bit more rapid as we move through the excerpt? And it really has an effect of sort of building the energy as it goes through. It gets a little bit more busy, the notes get a little bit more challenging, the phrases are tougher to pull off, therefore a little bit more impressive. And it's just a really, really nice texture that he creates throughout this 8-bar line. So let's listen to it one more time and listen for how that quarter note stuff goes into eighth note stuff, goes into eighth note triplet stuff, and how nicely it flows from the beginning of the excerpt to the end. So just playing this excerpt over and over again can really help you to internalize some of that real life rhythmic flexibility, something from a real life statement that an amazing musician made. Now, if you think about it, it's kind of like the exercise that we did the past 2 weeks, but in reverse, right? We went from the smallest rhythmic value to the largest rhythmic value. This is kind of doing the opposite, starting with the longer notes, going towards the shorter notes. So a little bit different, but it shows you how you can even take an exercise like I gave you last week, and you could just play it backward, and that would give you something completely new to work on. And that's what it's all about in your practice time, is kind of thinking outside the box, right? Doing something and then figuring out every single way you can possibly flip that basic exercise to keep encouraging more and more new ideas. That's really what it's all about, in my opinion, in the practice room. That's what I'm constantly striving for when I'm in the practice room. All right. Well, hopefully you enjoyed this little excerpt from Sonny Stitt's solo. Remember, if you are a Patreon member, you actually get access to the entire solo. I will post it again for you. But that's just a great example from one of the master musicians of all time on how rhythmic flexibility can really help you out. Now, you probably guessed this already, but next week is going to be our tune of the month, and we are going to use All of Me in the regular key. So make sure you tune in next week for that episode. We'll have an etude written for you that even uses some of these same ideas that we've been going over this month. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Remember, if you have any questions, you can always get in touch with me on the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group, or you can reach me at 10minutejazzlesson@gmail.com. Remember, if you want to get signed up, get these exercises, get this excerpt from the solo, you can do so by going to 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, get yourself signed up, and you get instant access to everything we've ever done here on the show, which is 262 episodes at this point. All right, hope you're doing well out there. Hope you're staying safe and healthy as always, and we will talk to you soon. Have a good weekend, everybody. Bye.